It usually begins small. A subtle shift in how you talk, a hesitation before sharing your real opinion, a forced smile you offer just to keep the peace. You tell yourself it's harmless, that you're being kind, understanding, accommodating. But deep down, a quiet discomfort grows. It's the feeling of stepping away from yourself, one small compromise at a time. Nietzsche believed that one of the greatest tragedies of modern life is the slow erosion of individuality. Not through violence or force, but through the subtle demands of others, the ones that seem reasonable, even loving, yet ask you to betray who you are. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche warns of the herd instinct, that pull to belong, to conform, to be accepted by the many. He wasn't advocating selfishness. He was illuminating the quiet violence of a culture that celebrates sameness and punishes authenticity. When someone asks you to deny your voice, your truth, your values, what they are really asking is, disappear a little so I can be comfortable. This kind of request often comes in the form of emotional coercion. Just this once, they say. Don't make such a big deal out of it. Or more subtly, you've changed. But behind those words is a deeper plea. Stay who I need you to be, not who you've become. And here lies Nietzsche's radical insight. Staying loyal to yourself may require losing people who only loved the version of you that didn't challenge them. It may mean enduring moments of painful solitude. But to betray yourself, to continuously silence your instincts, your art, your direction, is to live in quiet resentment. And that, Nietzsche believed, is where the spirit begins to rot. In midlife, this truth becomes harder to ignore. You've lived long enough to sense when you're bending too far for others, and you know the emotional toll it takes, the weariness, the self-doubt. The growing sense that your life, though full, feels oddly unlived. Staying away from those who ask you to betray yourself isn't about cutting people off impulsively. It's about noticing which relationships require a mask and which ones give you the space to breathe. It's about refusing to pay the emotional price of pleasing others at the expense of your own soul. Because the greatest loyalty you owe is not to your past or even to others' expectations. It's to your becoming. And any person who asks you to halt that journey, even in the name of love, is not walking beside you. They are trying to walk on you. If this reflection has already touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. What part spoke to you the most? Now let's continue. There's a quiet manipulation that happens in certain relationships, one that rarely uses harsh words or overt control. Instead, it comes disguised as concern, sarcasm, or faint praise. It shows up when someone deflates your dreams, questions your confidence, or finds subtle ways to dim your light. At its core, it's a request. Please stay small so I don't have to confront my own limitations. Nietzsche saw this dynamic as a hallmark of what he called resentment, a deep, often unconscious resentment that weak people harbor toward the strong. But to be clear, strength here isn't about domination or control, it's about vitality. It's about someone who is becoming more of themselves, breaking away from convention, speaking clearly, creating boldly, or daring to live authentically. To a person consumed by resentment, your growth is not inspiring, it's threatening. Your confidence unsettles them. Your progress makes them feel inadequate. And rather than look inward and ask, what is this discomfort teaching me? They turn outward and ask you to shrink. This can happen in marriages, friendships, even with family. You start a new business and they joke that you're chasing pipe dreams. You begin a fitness journey and they remind you to just be realistic. You start setting boundaries and they label you selfish or difficult. But Nietzsche's challenge to us is this: why would you sacrifice your becoming for someone else's comfort? There's a false virtue in staying small to make others feel secure. It's often praised as loyalty, humility, or being down to earth, but beneath it is often fear. The fear of outgrowing your environment, the fear of rejection, the fear of being labeled too much. As we reach midlife, many of us face a silent choice. Do I continue to manage other people's discomfort with my growth, or do I finally give myself permission to expand, even if it means being misunderstood? Nietzsche would argue that true freedom begins the moment you stop apologizing for your strength. Not because you owe the world arrogance, but because you owe yourself truth. When you step fully into your potential, it reveals the hidden contracts others have placed on you. And that revelation can be painful, but it's also liberating. People who truly love you will adjust. They'll cheer for your evolution, not fear it. But those who ask you to stay small, their love was always conditional, based not on who you are, but on who they needed you to remain. So stay away from anyone who's uncomfortable with your growth. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. Because you were not put on this earth to manage someone else's insecurity. You were born to rise. There are moments in life when your eyes open, suddenly, painfully, irreversibly. You see someone's true character. You witness a betrayal, a pattern, a manipulation you once excused. And in that moment, the truth demands something of you, acknowledgement. But often, this is when someone steps in, calmly, insistently, and says, "No, you're overreacting." That's not what really happened. They aren't asking you to forgive, they're asking you to pretend you never saw it at all. Nietzsche would see this as a corruption of the will, not the will to dominate others, but the will to truth, to see clearly, to live honestly, to refuse illusion. These are the foundations of strength in Nietzsche's philosophy. He called out society's tendency to worship comfort over truth, to cling to beliefs that soothe rather than confront. When someone asks you to deny what you've seen, they're not protecting peace, they're protecting power. Their power, the status quo, the image of themselves they need you to maintain. If you admit what happened, their carefully constructed world cracks, and they fear that. So they gaslight, deflect, or spiritualize the betrayal. Everyone makes mistakes. Don't be so dramatic. Let it go. But what they're really saying is, protect my comfort at the cost of your clarity. And clarity is expensive. Once you've seen, you can't unsee. You might lose closeness. You might become the difficult one, the negative one. In families, this often plays out as emotional exile. The one who names the dysfunction becomes the problem, not the dysfunction itself. But Nietzsche would urge you to resist, because the strength of your life depends on your fidelity to what is real. The more you pretend, the more your soul withers. The more you agree to false narratives, the more disconnected you become from your own instincts. And that disconnection leads to anxiety, to shame, to a creeping sense of hollowness. In midlife especially, truth becomes non-negotiable. You've lived long enough to know what you've lived through. You've earned your eyes. And if others can't handle what you've seen, that's not your burden to carry. So stay away from those who ask you to revise your reality for their peace of mind. Not because they are evil, but because they are not yet ready to live honestly. And that dishonesty, if you stay too close to it, will slowly poison your own perception. Nietzsche once wrote, "I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you." In this, he wasn't just talking about others, but about the betrayal of the self that happens when we accept the lie, even after we've seen the truth. At first, it might feel like love. They say they need you, can't function without you, that your words carry more weight than you realized. You feel important, even honored. But soon that responsibility becomes heavier. Your joy becomes a threat. Your boundaries become a betrayal. And slowly you find yourself managing their mood, afraid of triggering disappointment, withdrawal, or rage. What they're asking, without always saying it, is this: carry the burden of how I feel because I won't. Nietzsche saw this kind of emotional dependency as a dangerous denial of personal agency. To him, each person is a becoming responsible for shaping their inner world through struggle, reflection, and choice. When someone hands you their emotional life and demands you fix it, they are refusing that responsibility and trying to make you smaller in the process. The truth is, you can't heal what they won't own. You can't constantly explain yourself to someone who interprets everything through a filter of woundedness. You can love them deeply even, but if love means abandoning your peace to protect their volatility, it's no longer love. It's emotional servitude. This dynamic often comes wrapped in guilt. You made me feel this way. If you really cared, you'd never say that. These phrases twist natural disagreements into accusations. They turn boundaries into crimes. And over time, you begin to question your right to feel, to think, even to exist freely. Nietzsche would call this a surrender of strength, not physical strength, but moral clarity, the ability to see where you end and the other begins. And in a society that often romanticizes self-sacrifice, especially in long-term relationships, it's easy to lose that edge. Particularly for those in midlife, who have spent decades accommodating, negotiating, absorbing. But there is no virtue in carrying what was never yours. Empathy is not martyrdom. Compassion does not require self-erasure. One of Nietzsche's most profound ideas was that suffering should not be wasted. If someone is hurting, that pain can be a catalyst for growth, but only if they choose to face it. When you constantly shield them from discomfort, you rob them of that opportunity. You don't protect them, you enable them. And perhaps worse, you betray yourself in the process. So stay away from people who make you the manager of their moods. Not out of coldness, but out of respect. For them, for yourself, and for the sacred space between two whole beings. Real relationships are not built on control, but on the mutual responsibility to grow, even when it's hard. Because your peace is not a gift to be given away. It's a garden to be tended, and no one has the right to trample it, no matter how loudly they call it love. It rarely sounds sinister. It usually sounds casual, even logical. It's not a big deal. Everyone does it. You're too serious. It might be a small lie, a favor that crosses a line, or a silent agreement to stay quiet when something feels wrong. And yet in that moment, a quiet line is crossed inside you. A line that Nietzsche warned about in almost every one of his works, because it's never just once. Integrity doesn't erode in earthquakes. It crumbles grain by grain, under the weight of small betrayals we justify in the name of convenience, connection, or fear. Nietzsche believed that the greatest danger to the individual wasn't external force. It was internal compromise. That slow, invisible decay that begins when we trade the truth for belonging, or silence our conscience to protect someone else's reputation. He saw this as a kind of spiritual decay, a weakening of the will, the soul, the clarity that makes life worth living. When someone asks you to let it slide, to not make it weird, they aren't just asking you to look the other way. They're asking you to join them in a world where truth bends to advantage, where right is relative, and where the end justifies the means. But there's a cost to that world, and you don't always feel it right away. Sometimes it shows up as anxiety. Other times it's a sense of fragmentation, of not recognizing yourself when you're alone. And over time it becomes harder to draw clear lines. You begin to tolerate what once would have shaken you. You stop trusting your own instincts. This is especially dangerous in midlife, when many face crossroads, career changes, relationship tensions, questions of legacy. The temptation to keep the peace, to go along just to avoid disruption, can be overwhelming. And yet this is also when integrity becomes most sacred. Because it's no longer just about what you do, it's about who you are becoming. Nietzsche challenges us to live with intellectual honesty, to look clearly, to choose boldly, to refuse convenience when it comes at the cost of soul. He knew that in a world filled with half-truths and hidden agendas, a person who chooses integrity becomes dangerous. Not because they harm others, but because they cannot be manipulated. So when someone asks you to bend your values just this once, understand they are testing something deeper than your compliance. They are testing your clarity, your alignment, your essence. And if you give it away once, it becomes easier to do it again. Not because you are weak, but because the mind protects itself by normalizing what it cannot reconcile. Stay away from those who coax you to betray your inner compass. They are not leading you to peace. They are leading you to forget yourself. You're too intense. Why do you always have to be different? Can't you just fit in for once? These are the kinds of phrases that can haunt a person for decades. They don't sound aggressive. In fact, they often come wrapped in laughter or concern. But what they carry is a quiet demand. Dilute yourself, soften your edges, tuck away the parts that make you stand out. Nietzsche saw this impulse, both in individuals and in societies, as a profound danger to the human spirit. To him, conformity was not merely boring, it was a kind of moral failure. He believed each person carried within them a unique configuration of instincts, passions, strengths, and contradictions, and that the greatest task of life was not to erase those, but to cultivate them. When someone asks you to hide what makes you different, they're not complimenting your adaptability. They're asking you to betray the very source of your vitality. This is especially true in cultures that prize stability over disruption, tradition over innovation. In such environments, uniqueness is often treated with suspicion. The person who sees too much, feels too deeply, or thinks too freely becomes a problem, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient. And this pressure doesn't always come from enemies. It often comes from people who love you, parents who want to protect you, partners who feel threatened by your growth, friends who feel left behind. They may not even realize they're doing it. But slowly you begin to edit yourself. You laugh a little less loudly. You downplay your ideas. You avoid subjects you care deeply about, just to keep the peace. And then one day, you look in the mirror and barely recognize yourself. Nietzsche would call this a form of spiritual self-mutilation, a slow death by 1,000 silences. And for what? Acceptance? Safety? The approval of people who only celebrate a diluted version of you? In midlife, these compromises come into sharp focus. You realize how much of your life has been lived in reaction, adapting to others' expectations, censoring your soul, becoming palatable. And the cost of that becomes too high to ignore. Nietzsche's radical idea was that your uniqueness is not a flaw to be hidden, it's a flame to be protected. The world doesn't need another copy. It needs you, unfiltered, undiluted, unapologetic. So stay away from people who ask you to downplay your essence, not because they are cruel, but because they are not yet free enough to welcome what is different. And your becoming is too precious to be sacrificed on the altar of their discomfort. Your weirdness, your fire, your depth, those aren't liabilities. They are your signal. And the right people won't just tolerate it, they will recognize themselves in it. It's a strange thing, how the very people who once cheered for your growth can later resist it. They say you've changed, and it doesn't sound like a compliment. They remind you of who you used to be, of what you used to believe, what you once tolerated, how much easier you were to be around before. What they're really asking is this: stop evolving. Return to who you were, because that version made me more comfortable. Nietzsche believed that the essence of life was not stability, but transformation. He wrote of becoming, of self-overcoming, of the painful necessity of shedding skin after skin to move closer to truth, power, and purpose. To him, stagnation was not peace, it was spiritual death. And yet, many people around us, and even well-meaning ones, unconsciously ask us to stop changing. They're not always aware of it. But as you shift, something in their world feels unstable. Your evolution confronts their inertia. Your healing illuminates their wounds. Your new boundaries threaten the old dynamics. It's not that they hate you, it's that they can't follow you. And rather than face that, they beg you to slow down. In midlife, this becomes especially poignant. You begin to reclaim parts of yourself you lost. You confront roles you played for decades. You start saying no to what once felt non-negotiable. And sometimes people you've known for years struggle to accept this version of you, the one with sharper clarity, fewer apologies, deeper needs. They may say you're being selfish. They may call you distant, cold, or unrecognizable. But Nietzsche would remind you, this resistance is not a signal to stop. It's confirmation that you're growing beyond your old container. He wrote, "You must become who you are," a phrase that sounds simple but contains the weight of an entire life. To become who you are means risking rejection. It means grieving relationships that only worked when you stayed small, silent, or unhealed. It means walking away from environments that celebrate your past, but resist your present. But the alternative is stagnation. And stagnation, Nietzsche warned, breeds bitterness, resentment, a life filled with regrets for the versions of yourself you buried to keep others comfortable. Stay away from those who can't accept your evolution. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love yourself enough to keep growing, even if they won't come with you. Because the task of your life is not to remain legible to others, it's to remain faithful to your becoming. And those who truly love you will evolve with you, not chain you to who you were.